Why is it like this? That should just be my picture in the front. We can pick up where we left off, which is on text 26, chapter 3. I guess if we were going to recap where we're at right now in the Gita. Hang on, we're having some technical difficulties. If we're going to recap where we are right now, Arjuna's had a really rough day. The world's really turned upside down on him. He's, just on the verge of a massive war. It's gonna be a lot of bloodshed. He's not sure whether he should fight or walk away. Krishna helps him out and gives him two really valuable pieces of instruction. The first thing he does, he tells him how he should think about the world. That he should realize he's not the body, and he should look at things from a much broader perspective. To give you an example of the difference, if you look at things from a broader perspective, George Floyd was murdered on camera in public by one member of the Minneapolis police force along with several accomplices. George Floyd actually knew his murderer. They were bouncers at the same nightclub. Did you know that?
He knew it?
You're going to repeat what I said? You can walk into class late and then repeat what I say.
Sorry.
So, if you focus on what's right in front of you, which I think is important to do, you're watching a corrupt police force murder U.S. citizens in broad daylight with impunity. It's definitely time to take to the streets. You go a little broader, it's not just about George Floyd. It's about 400 years of slavery. And black people not having equal rights forever. I mean, certainly up till today, but their rights they had less rights. Further back you go, they had the less rights they had until they were treated like property. And no reparations were made. Chairman of Black Entertainment, BET, I don't know if he filed a lawsuit, but he called for $14 trillion in reparations. Looking at all the slaves and how much money they've been denied and based on insurance rates and whatever. They came up with the figure $14 trillion. And the country was built on the back of slaves. The country was built on the back of slaves. So, it was like, there's George Floyd, got murdered. Then, like, you see his kids, it makes you a little more angry. Then you look at slavery and the way black people have been treated in this country forever, and since before we were a country. And it gets worse. You get more angry, more upset, more disturbed. You know how many people die a year of starvation? 9 million. You know how many people a day that is? It's 25,000. 25,000 people, 365 days a year, die of starvation. You know how many of those are kids? 3.1 million. 8,000 kids die a day of starvation. Then you got sex slaves. Those figures, the FBI figures around like 700 million sex slaves in the world today. 700,000? Yeah, 700,000. And then, but if you look at like UNICEF, which is the United Nations Children's Fund, they're putting the figure close to 2 million. Sex slaves. Then you got like the forced mutilations, where women are forced to mutilate their genitalia, and you got the forced marriages, and you got bribe burnings, and you got like, there's 1 million too few women in India and China. It's illegal to find out the sex of your baby in India. You'll lose your medical license if you tell somebody the sex of their child when you do an ultrasound. Why? Because parents find out they're having a girl, they want to have a boy, and so they kill the kid. Selective abortion. It's been going on in China for decades. And the result is there's like 1 million too few girls in these two countries. 1 million. Like they just, because they're girls, they got murdered. That's 2 million, but 3 million kids are getting murdered every year from not being able to eat enough food. And you got the sex slaves. I mean, I'm sorry, man. George Floyd, slavery. I mean, do you know how many slaves we brought to the country, the U.S.? I was surprised. I actually dug into statistics a little bit. There were 12 million slaves that were brought across. 2 million of them perished on the middle passage. But only a fraction of those actually came to the U.S., like 5%. 95% of them went to the Caribbean and to Brazil to work on the sugarcane fields. We did cotton. Cotton grows here, a little different climate. We did tobacco. But down south, it was a lot of sugar. Sugar was used to make rum. Rum was a hot commodity. So we brought about 600,000 slaves to the U.S., and that swelled to 4 million because their children became slaves automatically. 4 million people, including the children, the kids who were born of those people over hundreds of years. That many children die of starvation every year. 4 million slaves. Hitler did that times 1.5 in 5 years. Not even in 5 years, just a few years. It was when things started unraveling in World War II and they came up with the final solution. And they marked the Jewish for Sonderhandlung, for special handling. Hitler managed to kill 6 million Jews, half the Jewish population in the world, at that time. In half the population, 50% of the world's Jews. It was either 33 or 50% of the world's Jews died in a period of like 2 years. The numbers are staggering. And that was the Jewish, that was in the last 100 years, in the last 80 years. There's people alive who actually lived through that. And if you've got Jewish friends in the U.S., you get by like 50, 60% chance their family died in the gas chambers. Their grandparents escaped, but their great-grandparents didn't, or their cousins didn't, or their uncles didn't, Because it's half, a third or half. The numbers are insane. They've just now the Jewish population is again back to what it was. It took 100 years to get back. Native Americans, 2 million. Sometimes they say 100 million, but I think 2 to 10 million is probably the best numbers you're ever going to get. Sometimes the big rah-rah Native American people say it's 100 million, but I think more realistic would be 2 to 10 million. Big numbers there with Native Americans. Then what do you do? At a certain point, you're just paralyzed. Like, what do you do? This whole idea of think globally and act locally, I don't know. I don't know if that works for me. Should we ignore starving kids because they're in a different country? It's interesting what happens when you broaden your perspective. On one hand, if you broaden your perspective, your upsetness increases and your anger increases. But at a certain point, you hit this watershed moment, and it just becomes paralyzing. And you don't know which way to go. I've watched the video of George Floyd dying a few times just to really try and feel it, sit with it, let it affect me. It's not really possible for me as a white man to know what it's like to be black in this country. It's just not possible. I've been in India where people gawk at me, and Prabhupada talked about his Western disciples being white elephants in India. And so when you're in India as a white devotee, especially a few decades ago when I was living in India, people looked at you like you were a circus animal. Like the epithet, the white elephant, was actually appropriate. People looked at you as a curiosity. Like a circus animal. People follow you around, just look at you and point at you and gawk at you like shamelessly. Indians have no sense of social decorum, at least, and like when you get a group of them together. I mean, I'm being stereotypical, but they'll like just stand there right in front of you and point at you and talk about you, and you're like, "Hey, I'm right here, buddy." And there's some hatred, some like real xenophobia, and some real like racism and condescension, and it's systemic, it's societal. And Indians are quite racist. Color, like by color, the color of your skin has a pretty big determinant factor on how people are viewed socially in India. Obviously, this isn't a wholesale critique of the Indian subcontinent. There are incredibly saintly people there as well, and everything in between. But, I could go home. I had a whole country of people that I could go home to where I felt like I fit in. So I might not have felt like I fit in there, but I always had the option of going home. A lot of people don't have that option of going home. It's just this is their life. I could have watched American TV and seen people that looked like me on TV. But a few decades ago, you don't know this now. Things have changed in the entertainment industry tremendously, and now the white person is the it's like there's a token white guy in the show, and everybody else is biracial. There's 3 Asian people and 2 gay people, and it's like that now. But it didn't used to be like that. Everybody used to be white, and there was a token people of color. No gay people on TV. That like 30, 40 years ago when I was watching TV, didn't even exist. Maybe like an art house movie or something like that might treat the subject. But in mainstream media, it was almost non-existent. Yeah, I could go home. I could go back to my tribe. I could go to a place where I felt like I belonged. For black people in this country, please don't do that. For black people in this country, for generations, where are they going to go home to? We did that. We made Liberia. Some of the worst human rights crimes in the world have gone on in Liberia. It's on the western coast of Africa. We sent the slaves back. Once we freed the slaves, we thought, let's just send them back. And that's Liberia. From liberation, Liberia. They're liberated, they go back, but then the slaves who've been freed went back and used colonial tactics to subjugate the natives who were there, and then the freed slaves became a ruling class there, and some of the worst human rights violations. There was a massive civil war a couple decades ago, and they were actually practicing cannibalism. You can Google it. They would practice. They would eat the soldiers they killed as to give them like a protection when they went out to fight the next day. Well, what are you going to do? It's like the Back to Africa movement, But for most people, they've been here for so many generations. They don't speak the language. They don't identify with the people. And so they got to live in a place where they never quite feel like they belong. I don't know what that's like, but that's still a first world problem. Feeling uncomfortable, feeling like people are always judging you, suffering microaggressions all the time, even blatant racism, having people be killed by police brutality occasionally. Let's say 50 times a year, 100 times a year. These are first world problems. 3 million kids starve to death every year. 8,500 kids a day. 25,000 people. You follow the numbers? In the 10 minutes it took to kill George Floyd, 100 people, 150 people had died of starvation. 50 kids had died of starvation in that 10 minutes. And every 10 minutes subsequently. In the 10 minutes I've been talking, 50 kids have died of starvation. Myopia is great because you get to focus your hatred on one thing, and it's empowering. You feel like we go by toilet paper. We feel like we nailed that one down. We got that one down. So we find something to hate and we fix it. But if you really start to get into suffering, well, to speak of the 50 billion animals that are killed every year, and the 1 to 3 trillion fish that are killed every year, and then the millions of kids that are aborted every year. I value human life more than animal life. Because human beings have a greater potential to feel and think and therefore suffer. But it doesn't mean I don't value animal life at all, and that it doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the equation, or that the unborn lives of aborted kids don't deserve to enter the conversation. That's a whole nother one. That's another million a year. That's another million a year. Every year. 1 out of every 5 people in a soup kitchen as a kid. 1 out of every 9 people in the U.S. is food insecure. They don't, 66 million people a day, not in the U.S., but in the world, go to school every day hungry and not having had food. When you're dying of starvation, when you're starving to death, you get sick about half the time, so you're sick about half the year. Because your body doesn't have the nutrients to fight off the disease. I was listening to one lady tell a story. She was, there was this whole, I don't know if you guys remember Darfur. Anyway, Darfur, there's a whole thing. They were coming to a village, cut everybody's arms off, including the kids, so they couldn't fight. Just insane genocide. Central Africa. And people, huge swaths of the country just had to leave. They were just abandoned, had to walk hundreds of miles. There was one woman who was telling a story. She was she had to leave one of her kids on the side of the road. She was carrying her 2 kids. They had no water. She was dehydrated. She had 2 kids, like 3 and 5. She had to put one of them down, leave him on the side of the road. For sure he died. And then she managed to make it to the refugee camp a couple days later. And she was just, inconsolable. We got first world problem in this country, including the black community. It's a first world problem. You want to really sit down and fathom it? We don't hold a card to people who are starving to death. We're not even in the same conversation. Does that mean we should do nothing? No, but it does mean you got to think about things a little differently. You got to think a little bigger. You think too big, you start to get paralyzed. What are you going to do? You go help this person, you're not helping that person. You do this, you're not doing that. There's costs everywhere you look. There's no way to win it. And you just want to sit down on the side of the road and call it a day, slit your wrists and just I can't do anything. It's too much. No, you numb yourself. Forget about it. Or find somebody to hate. Because that's easier than trying to fathom the whole thing. I can walk and chew gum. I can feel for George Floyd. I can feel for the black community. I can try to be an ally. And I can think about the bigger picture. That's what I do. I try not to be too myopic and too focused. Pol Pot, you guys know Pol Pot? Khmer Rouge, Cambodia in the 70s. He killed a couple million people. Tiny little country. Half the population wiped out. He's a genocidal maniac. A little mini Hitler. He was in concert with Mao. What to speak of Stalin? 20 million. Just the numbers are just... And there's a whole white slave trade that went on with millions of people who were transported to Istanbul. The history of the world is just like trauma after trauma after trauma. I mean, you want to talk about a minority group? I got another one for you. After World War II, the Jewish people went and took over Israel. What happened to all the poor goat farmers there? Do you know the most densely populated place in the world? The most densely populated area on the planet is the Gaza Strip. Because the Jewish people, they took over Israel and they shoved all the Palestinians into little tiny ghettos. And they just keep cramming them in tighter and tighter. My mind is failing me right now, but there's a name for it. The settlers. There's Jewish people who make it their point to go outside of Israel and start to buy property in the Palestinian areas to start to further, because when enough of them are there, then it's a suburb, and then the government has to take care of them, and it continues to crush these people. The most densely populated place on planet Earth are the Palestinian ghettos, where they're forced, they're crammed in like sardines, they got nowhere to go. Their land was taken away from them within the last 75 years. And there's millions of them, packed like sardines. And Israel's armed with teeth, and every time, they try to rise up, they get crushed. There was Nat Turner. Nat Turner was a freedom fighter. In 1831, he led a rebellion, killed 50, 60 white people. He heard voices from God and was a Christian preacher, but decided that Armageddon was upon us and took up arms and killed the white man. And then, people lost it. The slave owners lost it, and they slaughtered hundreds of slaves in retaliation. All throughout the South. They were so freaked out about it. People had nothing to do with the rebellion. They slaughtered them. Lynched them. What we saw with George Floyd, honestly, it was a modern day lynching. It went beyond Eric Garner. Eric Garner, the cop, was just kind of stupid. Didn't really know what he was doing. And even Breonna Taylor, she was innocent, and it was horrific what happened, but obviously, they weren't intending to go and kill a nurse. They just got trigger happy. But George Floyd was straight up, it was a lynch. And they knew each other. They definitely crossed paths. They had overlapping shifts at the same bar where they both bounced. There's no way they didn't know who each other were. That's just not possible. Arjuna had a moment like this, where there was stuff right in front of him, but the ramifications and the back and forth and the possibilities were just endless, and it just spun him out until it was like, what am I supposed to do? And Krishna helped him out with the idea that you're not the body, which is probably the most powerful idea and the most medicinal idea that's ever existed. It's pre-theistic. But it's the ultimate game changer. It irrevocably broadened your perspective. So you can't be narrow-minded. And it makes everything just a whole. It relegates everything to a different position, and you see the bigger picture, and you can't unsee it. And when you do that, you can do what you got to do in life and suffer through what you got to suffer, and not let it get you down, and hope can spring eternal, and you've got something bigger going on, you've got a bigger yes, and you can deal with whatever the small no's are. Actually, when people get too fervent, they lose their ability to think properly. We don't want people on a jury that are biased. Boxers, when boxers get angry, they never make it. It's got to be cold fury. Same thing with any sport. The heat, the anger doesn't get you anywhere, because if you're against somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, then you can just kind of overwhelm them with sheer aggression. But against somebody who knows what they're doing in any sport, that aggression makes you sloppy, and the people capitalize on it. And so the boxer starts throwing wild punches, and he gets picked apart. The same thing happens in football and basketball, all these sports. They got to keep it cool. There's too much adrenaline. Your motor functions go down tremendously. You literally narrow. You guys ever had a full-blown adrenaline dump? This gets black, and all you see is the person in front of you. It's terrible for any kind of a serious fight, because you can't see things coming in your periphery. It makes you way less effective. You literally become narrow-minded. Like, that's actually what happens to you. But realizing you're not the body makes you irrevocably broad-minded. And then you can go back and you can do your duty without being attached to the results, which was his second lesson. And Arjuna couldn't understand this. And so Krishna even said, okay, don't be detached from the results. Just do your duty, just because it's going to make you, and you're going to win. And he gave him another version of doing your duty, which had a reward attached, with the understanding that if you do your duty and you're connected to something bigger, because your duties are outlined in our sacred texts, then now you're connected to the sacred text. Then when they start telling you that you're not the body and this and that, that stuff will ruminate and it'll eventually take hold, and you'll be able to do your duty without being attached to the results eventually. And then he speaks this verse. So as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in a spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities. So the verse says, Na buddhi bedam janayet. You shouldn't be the cause of breaking of the minds of ajnanam karma sanginam, of ignorant people who are attached to their work. If you give them too much information, they'll hate you. It's just too much. They'll freak out on you. You'll break their minds, and they'll like give up the whole pursuit, or they'll get paralyzed. And a lot of times they hate you. Like, I could imagine the way I'm speaking right now, it might be unpopular. Like I'm being callous or something like that. And all these numbers, What about George Floyd's daughter? Yeah, George Floyd's daughter, who's going to go to college because Kanye West paid for her college. Who's going to be okay? How about all the kids whose parents just died of starvation and they're about to die in 5 minutes because now their parents aren't going to feed them? How about all of them? Well, you shouldn't use that one to argue against this one. You're right, and you should use this one to take away from that one. You can't give this information to people. It's too much. So what do? Joshayat sarvakarmani. Make people enjoy their work. Make people enjoy all their work. Vidvan yukta samachan. You behave properly. You behave in a restrained way. You behave properly. You're in knowledge. You make people enjoy their work, and they can gradually become detached, but don't give them too much too quick. And in fact, that's just what Krishna did with Arjuna. It was too much for Arjuna. He couldn't take it, so Krishna dumbed it down. It's interesting how applicable these verses are, isn't it, to current affairs? The Gita is not just about being detached, about how big of a donation you get when you go to somebody's house and you do a program, or how much your 5 o'clock chose to invest with you, or how big your restaurant did, or whether you got the promotion or not, or how many new people signed up for your yoga studio, or how many followers you won on social media, or how many computers you sold, how many lives you touched, or how many people you helped. It's not about just being Zen when you're in your medical career. It's not just about being Zen during that stuff. It's actually about the heaviest stuff that you're going to encounter in life. It works. It's built to last. The knowledge of the Gita, this knowledge, this wisdom works in the most difficult circumstances. When everything else fails you, sacred wisdom doesn't. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. So much of what's happening, so much of what happens in your life is karma. You can't actually change it. You can change how you choose to respond to it, but you can't change it. Your freedom consists of how you're going to deal with stuff. It doesn't always consist of being able to control what's going to happen to you. You follow? It's not like the slaves in this country before the emancipation. It's not like there weren't intelligent slaves that were thinking, I got to get out of here, I got to run away, I got to get freed, I got to get my family back. So many people must have thought like that. They say most probably more slaves died getting to the slave markets in Africa than actually came on the journey. They got 12 million people on the journey. 2 million died en route. 10 million made it. But more than that died just getting to the slave market. Who wants to be sold into slavery? Who wants to be tied up and sold into slavery? You follow? People were running away and breaking ranks and doing everything they could. But there might be the concentration camps. I was sitting with some people last year. Somebody had been raped. Somebody else had been horribly molested. And then somebody else jumped in and said, oh yeah, I'm from Cambodia. I have 10 brothers and sisters. They all got killed by Pol Pot. I'm the last survivor of my tribe. My mother got me out, couldn't get the rest of my family out. All of them died. Just sit with that one for a minute. And then multiply it times hundreds of thousands just in Cambodia. Times millions. People sometimes forget this, but Hitler killed just as many gypsies, Romanis, and blacks and gays and whatever, the other groups that he singled out as he did Jews. Multiply times millions, and that's what happened. My people, my tribe, the Serbians, came into power after decades of being beaten up with the falling of the Iron Curtain. They took over and they made rape camps. They raped Bosnian and Croatian women to impregnate them with Serbian bloodlines to ruin their bloodline and then send them back. They'd catch the women, they'd put them in these concentration camps, rape them on a regular basis until they got pregnant. Once they detected they were pregnant, they'd release them from the camps to go back to their village in shame, carrying a Serbian child, a half-breed Serbian child. That's what's been done to them, so they continued it. That stuff happened. I was a devotee when that happened. I was a devotee living in India while that went on. That wasn't just in my lifetime, it was in my adult lifetime. There's stuff you can't control. Stick around long enough. Sometimes you don't have any moves. Your only move is how you choose to take it. The only thing you can... Viktor Frankl, the famous philosopher, Jewish philosopher, lived through Auschwitz. He made this point. It's the last vestige of human freedom, is that you can't control things, but you can control the space between stimulus and response. And you can choose to take whatever happens in whatever way you want it to. And it can make you a better person. The worst thing people can throw at you can make you a better person. He said people live there not because they got enough food. Nobody got enough food. People lived there not because they had enough clothes. Nobody had enough clothes. People lived because they had something, some kind of burning yes in their life. Somebody they had to see again, somebody they had to reconcile with, somebody they had to save, something they had to do. Patanjali makes the point that you can focus on anything you want to, and it can be the focus of your samadhi. You can focus on a point, the tip of a spear, anything. Viktor Frankl actually makes a similar point. It could have been anything. It could have been playing the piano again. You got something that you have to do, so you have to live so you can do it. There's no bigger yes than Krishna. And I don't mean Krishna, our sectarian God. I mean Krishna, the supreme, the one without a second, the loving deity. There is no bigger yes. There never will be a bigger yes. That's it. Doesn't get any better. We didn't forget anything. That's it. There's nothing higher. You want the biggest yes that could ever exist? It's God. A beautiful, loving, intimate deity. With that, you can change a few things, and at the same time admit that you can't change everything. And be peaceful and be happy. And and you can bring freedom and joy and love everywhere you go. You're no longer dependent on your circumstances. Part of that is admitting that you can't build a better mousetrap and you can't build a Tower of Babel where you're going to figure it all out, and you can't build a stairway to heaven. Part of really sinking your teeth into devotion and a relationship with Krishna is understanding that that's the best thing you can do. Friend of mine, Kumi, sweetest girl ever, ridiculously tone deaf. She, like so many foolish yoga studio owners, posted pictures of herself closing up her shop and boarding it up, and then threw in the BLM hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And immediately, like a bunch of white social justice warriors, and maybe a few people of color too, but they jumped on her. Why aren't you talking about George Floyd? Why are you talking about your studio? What does your studio have to do with Black Lives Matter? And Kumi, just in perfect form, said, "Oh, my first boyfriend was black." And I was just like, I read that and I was like, oh my God, no. Oh God, no. And that was it. It was like chum to a bunch of sharks, and you could see them, and they were like, that just gave them everything they wanted, And then some knight in shining armor rode in on a horse and saved Kumi. He's the only black guy on the thread. Everybody else was like, Mexican or whatever. And he said, "I'm black. Kumi saved my life. She taught me yoga when I couldn't afford it. Now I teach yoga. All of you shut up. Don't talk about this woman, or you're going to have a problem with like an angry black man. And I got all day long to deal with you. I don't want to see her another word about this woman. She's a saint." And that was it. Everybody like, "Oh, I'm really glad to hear that." He's like, "Well, she saved my life. What have you done for my people?" Like he just like immediately jujitsu'd on him. And that was it. He was like, and people were just running for cover. Kumi was like practically tried to like jump off a cliff, and this person just saved her. But Kumi's actually got something. She teaches yoga to people so that they can be happy no matter what situation they're in life. So they can bring light to every situation. So they can love everybody. So they can find peace. So they can find joy. You follow? What's marching in the street do? Arguably, the criminals are going to have a larger effect than the peaceful protesters. I hate to say it. As much as it's not right, as much as they're becoming monsters to fight monsters, or maybe they're just opportunists, that gets people where it hurts, and then they change the laws. Then they say, "Hey, police chief, don't let this happen anymore. You train your people better. Keep your police dogs on a leash. They can't turn their body cams off. New protocols for how to, engage with people." Everyone marches in the street, holds hands, does kumbaya. What's that going to do? They're with the system. They're going with the system. No problem. We can do that. But then you start destroying everything, and then people sit up and take notice. We care. We're trying to help people. we're trying to help people the best way we can. It's not cheap. Changing somebody's heart, it takes time, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But if you can do that successfully, they can bring sunshine wherever they go. And they'll be contagious, and they'll make other people sunny, and they'll make other people bright. Krishna's making this point that you have to really embrace the reality that there are a lot of things in this world you will not be able to change. In order to deeply invest in your spiritual life. It doesn't mean you don't do anything, but it does mean you don't think that you're God and you're going to be able to change everything. And you kind of like acknowledge that. And you're not just in this world like, do as much as you can and then die. No, not like that. We're more than this world. There's something bigger going on. You look at it, and it's like you look at music today. Hip hop just dominates. It's like it's so valued in society. It's so popular. It's so valued. Where does hip hop ultimately come from? It comes from suffering. It's a modern day version of the blues. It's people rising out of suffering conditions. It's got its bones are the blues. Where the blues come from? They come from gospel. Where does gospel come from? It comes from Christianity. You took a group of people who were enslaved. There was chattel slavery. They were property. But they found in the promise of religion, they found a freedom. That nobody could take away. That's still true. You're rich, you're poor, you're free, you're not. Everybody dies. And it's all gone in 5 seconds. The body fails you, your mind fails you, it all gets taken away, and there's nothing left. This idea of spirituality, this idea that like there's something higher, there's something bigger, you're more than this world. It is the most powerful, dangerous, liberating, freeing idea that has ever existed. It is the key. And to give your life to sharing that is the highest welfare acts. It's the highest welfare act. It's the highest calling. And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. We may not be able to say it like this all the time. We may not be able to put it in people's faces, but we should have this confidence. We might have to learn how to speak better. But we should have this confidence. Material life and spiritual life, they're like strange bedfellows. Materialism has to go down for spirituality to go up. It's like a justice scale. Your interest in material solutions has to wane in order for you to really run with spirituality. Which is why Krishna makes this point, right on the heels of it. You behave properly, you figure out a way to get them, and what's the mindset? Stuff's going on that you can't change. What you can change is the way you feel about it. And maybe the stuff that's going on you can't change is that you're getting old and dying. or that your parents die, or that somebody gets cancer. Or that you're out of work. We try to fix those things, but we don't live or die with that. We got something bigger. We got a bigger yes. Yeah, we can go through the concentration camp of this material world with that bigger yes, that guiding light that we can't forget, and we keep ourselves broad. Not so we become callous. We can become empathetic, but we can really be empathetic. Not just a one-hit wonder. Shooting star. You know? I'm done. Where are we at time-wise?
About 3 more minutes.
Someone wants to chime in. We got 3 minutes. I'm interested in hearing. Yeah, loud.
I found it really inspiring, the discussion today.
Howard, can you hear him? Give me a thumbs up if you can. No, I can't hear you. Yell. Get up here. Yell.
I found the discussion very inspiring today, and it helps to put things in perspective and to give me some even more motivation on like what I should be doing and what I can be doing and what to focus on, because I've had a similar doubts about the value of some of the stuff that's happening, and wondering what I can and should be doing. And so this discussion was very timely and inspiring.
It's like everybody's got to stay in their lane. If you're a doctor and you want to really help people, then you go to work and you help people. You got to figure out where you can do the greatest good. Krishna's actually going to mention that. The next teaching is do your duty. Be attached to doing your duty. Don't be attached to doing somebody else's duty. Understand who you are, how you're made, what you're made to do, and do that. And be dedicated to that. He's got a whole thing. We got hung up here on these couple of verses, but it's very beautiful. It's like it's a whole evolution through action, a conscious evolution through doing your duty, and not jumping, digging one dell 100 feet deep and getting that water. Instead, digging 100 wells 1 foot deep, and you can never figure out why you can't get water. You understand? And so you're detached, but other people might not be, so you let them work, but then while they're working, they're eventually developing attachment. You realize there's some things you can't change, so you're not like going down with the ship on that. At the same time, you do your duty. And you have confidence in that. And you don't get seduced by that. Grass is green on the other side. I'm always going to move. Okay. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.